I mean, rule number one is do not send illustrations unless you are a professional illustrator. Forget that. People go and pay people to do illustrations so they can send it in. The publisher doesn't want it. The publisher wants your story, and they will match you with an illustrator, like Shane said. Good evening and welcome to WonderFest, a celebration of Irish children's books in 2021. My name is Patricia Forde and I'll be your chair tonight. And WonderFest is brought to you by a team of Irish writers and illustrators in association with Pavilion Theatre and with the kind support of Children's Books Ireland and DLR Libraries. It is funded by the Arts Council of Ireland. So just a little bit of housekeeping. This is a webinar, and at any time throughout the session, you can pop a question in the Q&A box you'll find on your screen. Or if you like to leave a comment about who you are or where you are, you can do that in the chat box. For all of us to know, in the background there is the ever-capable Alan O'Rourke, who's our technical manager, and a whole team of volunteers from WonderFest. So if you do have any problem, just pop it into the chat box and they'll see it there. And on that note, please remember that everybody can see everything in both boxes. This event will last for 90 minutes. Now, before we go to our wonderful panel, who are going to tell you everything about how to get published, I want to introduce you to Aoife Murray from Children's Books Ireland, who is their programme and event manager, and our great friend here at WonderFest. So hello, Aoife, and welcome.
Hi, Trish. Thanks a million. Thanks so much to everyone at WonderFest for having me here this evening. I'm not going to talk for long because I'm as keen for us to hear from the panel as you guys are. But I wanted to welcome you along and tell you that you've chosen the absolute best place to spend your Thursday evening. You're going to learn so much today. And I wanted to let you know a little bit about Children's Books Ireland for those of you who aren't familiar with us and haven't gotten in touch with us before. We are a non-profit arts organisation, and our aim is to make books a part of every child's life. We do lots and lots to make that happen, but the main thing that's of relevance this evening is supporting authors and illustrators at all stages of their careers in various ways. We support appropriate pay for artists, we provide professional development opportunities, and lots more. Over the past, we always say 18 months, there's nearly 2 years now of COVID restrictions, and we provided a lot of online community stuff where artists and illustrators could come together, including our monthly artist coffee mornings. So I'm not going to say any more. Congratulations for finding Properbook. They're a series of amazing professional development opportunities. Well done for coming along. You're going to be taking in an awful lot of information, so I know you're all going to be scribbling away at your notes. But do know that Children's Books Ireland is a resource for you, and we are waiting there for you to get in touch with us and to interact with us, hopefully come to our events either in person or online, and we'd love to learn more about you and your art. So again, my name is Aoife, and my email address is aoife@childrensbooksireland.ie, and our website is childrensbooksireland.ie, and I'll stick them in the chat now so everyone knows. But for now, I am going to stop talking, and I hope everyone enjoys the panel this evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Aoife. Great to hear from you, and top tip, do join Children's Books Ireland. You won't make a better decision. So without further ado, as they say in all the best places, I'm going to introduce you to our panel tonight. So first up is literary agent Clare Wallace. And Clare joined the Darley Anderson Agency in January 2011 and is building both that list and the Darley Anderson Illustration Agency list. As chief talent spotter, Clare loves to discover memorable new characters, bold and unique voices, strong concepts, and gripping storytelling. She represents picture books, middle grade books, teenage and young adult. So, hi Clare, and you're really welcome. Lovely to see you.
Hi.
Then we have writer Rob Grant, who was born in Waterford. Rob has a PhD in philosophy from Trinity College, where he was an Irish research scholar. He has taught philosophy both at Trinity and in several other institutions. He's founder of the Philosophy in the Community project and a member of Philosophy Ireland, and has taught philosophy in schools, prisons, community centres, and many other places. His first children's book, The Philosophy Resistance Squad, was recently published by Little Island. Welcome, Rob. Good to see you.
Thanks, Patricia. Thanks for having me.
And finally, an old friend of WonderFest, Shane Hegarty, is a children's writer and a journalist. Many of you will remember him when he was the arts editor of the Irish Times. His first children's series, Darkmouth, was nominated for the Waterstones Prize and an Irish Book Award. His most recent series, Boot, was nominated for the Sainsbury Children's Book Awards, Unpuss Irish Book Awards, and was selected as the Dublin UNESCO City of Literature Citywide Read in 2020. His writing has been translated into over 15 languages worldwide, and he also writes a column for the Sunday Times. Welcome, Shane.
Hi everybody. Hope you're keeping well. Thanks, Trace.
So, we better get straight down to business because my experience tells me from before that this 90 minutes will go very quickly by. So, Clare, I'm going to put you on the spot straight off and ask you to tell us about the different types of books that are published for children.
Okay, so I had a list which was board books, picture books, early readers, middle grade, and YA. And I've got and I know you'd said it would be good perhaps to talk about word count as well. So if I start with board books, I've got one like this. This is for really, really young readers, for babies, really. It's very first books with flaps to lift. I'd say there's probably literally about 20 words in this book. It's absolutely tiny. And then you have other kind of board books like this, which has been adapted from a picture book. Often these books have sold well, and the publishers suspect there would be a market for it as a board book as well. And then if you move up, so that would be for sort of 0 to probably about 2. And then moving up to kind of 2 to 3 to 5, you have picture books. So this one here, the Hegarty, most picture books are 32 pages long, and word count can completely range. It could be 150 words up to about a maximum of 1,000. Some publishers don't like them to be higher than 750 words. And to be honest, I think the sweet spot is between 500 and 600. I think it's quite long once you get to about 700. And the middle grade spans, before middle grade, you've got younger readers, which is about 5 to 7. The example I've got here is Bumble and Snug. This is very, very highly illustrated. And this is like a nice bridge between reading a picture book and moving on to kind of chapter books. Chapter books for 5 to 7, should probably be between 7 and 10,000 words as a rough guide. And then on from that, you've got 7 to 9, and the word count would be roughly about 20,000. And then you're moving into traditional middle grade space. I've got a couple of examples here. This one's much shorter. This would be the younger end of middle grade. This is a really fun, again, quite highly illustrated younger middle grade book. This would be your sort of 9 to 12 area, so historical middle grade. And this is probably a word count of between 40 and 50,000. But I'd say I don't think there are very strict rules at all on this. I've also got Dave Rudden's Nights of the Borrowed Dark here, was approved. But I think these were about 60,000 up. And some middle grade books do go longer. It depends on the story and the genre as well. So I don't think there's the parameters aren't too strong, except that the longer you get, I suppose, the more tricky it might get. And also you're asking a lot of the reader. And then finally, young adult. I've got 2 examples here. Young adult and teenage, I'd say word count could be anything from 50 plus, 50,000 words up to 70, 75,000. One of these is probably a bit longer, actually. And a couple of examples I've got: Beth Recalls, which is sort of light romance, and then also Deirdre Sullivan, this is much sort of darker, more literary, gothic, brilliant contemporary fantasy. So I hope that's sort of quite helpful, and that's the range. But there are exceptions to every rule. And I'd say with word count not to worry too much. I don't think it would ever be a deal breaker when you're submitting to an agent, unless you said this is 170,000 words long and it's for a 5-year-old. That would obviously be a quick no from me, I think.
Yeah, but I suppose you do kind of need to know when you're writing what it is that you're writing, particularly, if it's middle grade or it's YA, because apart from the word count, the whole content thing is very different in both. We'll come back to that.
Yes.
But I think it's important for you starting off to know what it is that you are writing. And I know for a lot of us, we learn a lot about how it works from hearing other people's stories. So Rob, I'm going to put you on the spot and just ask you, you just had your first book published. You tell us a little bit about what that adventure was like from when you wrote the book.
Yeah, I suppose my kind of journey into writing this first book is maybe a little bit different than most people, because my background, as you had mentioned, is in academic philosophy, you know, and my kind of passion and my work really is about trying to promote philosophy and introduce philosophy into communities and places that wouldn't normally have access to philosophy. So particularly into schools with younger people. And so I had been doing a lot of work in schools, I guess driven and motivated by a kind of a frustration with our education system that often tends to kind of focus on rote learning and memorization. And there's kind of lacking maybe space for children to think for themselves and think outside the box and question ideas that they receive and that kind of thing. So so I had done obviously some academic writing, which is so different from children's writing. I don't think you could possibly find anything so different. Like, academic writing is all about rigor and clarity, and it's very dry and technical and quite boring. Like, you're almost trying to get rid of mystery rather than create mystery in academic writing. So, and I had also done a little bit of writing for a general reader, some kind of opinion pieces for newspapers and various other things like that. So I had limited experience when it came to writing in kind of a novel, narrative, drama, storytelling form, but I kind of got a lucky break, and I had made a short documentary for RTE television about all this work in teaching philosophy, and I had been working with kids in schools, and a friend of mine who worked for the publisher Little Island at the time, Clare, who I'm sure many people already know, shout out to Grania for giving me this opportunity. Really, she said, why don't we do a book that introduces philosophy to kids? And I think the original intention behind that was maybe to do a kind of maybe an encyclopedia or a history of philosophical ideas or famous philosophers. And this was where I kind of took a punt and took a risk and said, I don't really want to do that, because that's been done many times in ways that are really, really good. And I said, why don't we try and reach kids that, you know, mightn't already have a disposition towards this way of thinking? And I wanted to write something fun and enjoyable that also introduced philosophy. And so I came up with this kind of idea for a story that had philosophical dialogues throughout it. This is the kind of structure of the book. And I had to kind of convince the publishers that I was capable of doing this, or I was able to do it, because they were a bit reluctant. They were like, look, I mean, you've never done this before. So I pitched them, I gave a synopsis, the plot structure, and they're like, okay, this sounds interesting, it sounds fun. And I went away and wrote a chapter. And you know, I had been kind of reading loads of children's books at the time, trying to kind of get into that space and into that voice, and trying to find ways to articulate philosophical ideas in a way that would be kind of compelling and interesting and accessible for young people. Because again, philosophy can be so technical and so complicated in the arguments and ideas. So it was a challenge, but it was really enjoyable. It was a really enjoyable experience. I mean, I loved it.
And also, Rob, what's really interesting about that is, you know, you did have a unique selling point, because you had that background in philosophy, which I'm sure the publishers found very, you know, attractive. And I think that's true for everybody. If there's something you're doing in your normal everyday life, you know, sometimes having that, particularly this in Rob's case was fiction, but for non-fiction in particular, you know, being able to bring that to a book is great. So thanks for that, Rob.
No worries.
Shane, can you remember back to when you had your first book published? Tell us, what was that like getting there?
It was amazing, because it was, I think, like a lot of people, I probably dreamt of it. I mean, it was a great ambition. So before actually I wrote children's books, I wrote a couple of history books, and one of them came through. The thing that kind of gave me confidence was, now I was quite lucky in that I was a journalist. I was a working journalist. I was working in the Irish Times. They asked us myself and Fintan O'Toole, so a lot of people will be familiar with Fintan, to do a 90th anniversary of the Easter Rising, which happened in Dublin in 1916. And it was such a popular supplement. They gave us, shows how maybe different things were in the media back almost 15 years ago now, when it is 15 years ago. They gave us 3 months and effectively kind of let me off to do it. And we put a supplement together and we aimed it at schools, and it was the biggest selling newspaper in the history of the Irish Times. And given how things are now, possibly the biggest selling that there will ever be. And it was one of those moments where having the book itself was phenomenal, and that sort of moment where I'd always wanted to write a book, like so many people, wasn't really sure what to do, even though I was working in the media. I sort of grabbed that sort of happy accident and that look, and then did another book with Gillan Macmillan. But all that time, I really wanted to write fiction. I'd always wanted to write fiction. I probably didn't have the confidence in myself to do it. I think maybe the longer we leave something like that, especially as we get older, and I talk to kids about this, I think kids are so free with their imaginations and their creativity. And sometimes as an adult, I don't know, but certainly I would have found myself almost arguing myself into not doing something because I thought, well, I don't have that connection with that part of my brain anymore. And yet it was in there all the time. And what happened was my twins were on their way, and I already had 2 other children, and I realized, well, I'm not doing another history book because I don't have time to research. And it sort of forced me into writing fiction, and just to kind of make the connection to what Clare does. Again, I think sometimes you have to find these opportunities where you grab them, and if you feel, or even just to put yourself out there and see what happens. And again, through work, I'd been lucky enough to work. I'd had a bit of contact with Marianne Gunn O'Connor, who people might know as an agent here in Dublin, to do with some work one day. And I literally just sent her a bit of this, of Dartmouth as it was then, really naively and with no real idea of what I was supposed to send or what she would like. I think it was about 5,000 words. And she, just the encouragement from that began that ball rolling, and led to myself and Marianne working together and to sort of reaching that point with Dartmouth first. And I will say, to kind of finish on that the one thing about, I think the excitement of writing and it is still there. And when I was in a bookshop yesterday, and I will never stop looking at my books on the shelves and being enormously proud and excited. And you can't help but want to stop people and say, I did that. And there's a whole team of people who put it together, and it wouldn't be done without a team of people. And that's something I've learned, and I think it's something that's important to learn. But when your name is on a book in the bookshelf, in a library, in a bookshop, or if you see it in a child's hands, there's still nothing like it. It's still an amazing experience.
We can see how enthusiastic you still are, and it is. There's nothing like it. It's a great thrill. And it brings us on to something which is, of course, the whole role of the agent. And for somebody who's just maybe finished a manuscript, has written their story, and they don't know what to do next. For a lot of us, we would think maybe the first port of call is an agent. Even though, Rob, I think you didn't have an agent when you signed up with Little Island. And we're really lucky in Ireland because a lot of Irish publishers will read your work without an agent. But having an agent, Clare, you might be able to shine some light on this. What good is an agent? Why do we need one? What does an agent do for you?
So an agent should really be your champion and your guide through the process. And I think being an agent is quite a wide role. I've written down that, I think we're kind of at times bodyguards, at times sense checker, at times counsellor, at times friend, at times editorial editor. I think in terms of what an agent kind of actually does, you can kind of probably break my job up into kind of 4 parts, which would be talent spotting first. It's my job to find new talent, and that's why doing events like this is wonderful, because you get to, hopefully I don't know who might be in the audience that now may think to submit to me, who might not have thought to do that before tonight. So that's my first job, and then I would work with a client on their work to try and get it kind of submission ready. And then when it is submission ready, it's my job to match make it with a publisher, with an editor, to come up with a list of people who I think are looking for exactly this kind of thing. And then all being well, I've sent that out on submission and I've match made, and somebody is making an offer to publish this book. And the next bit would be that I would negotiate that deal. And again, I think that's where having an agent is to your advantage, in that it is our job to know the ins and outs of contracts, to understand what every royalty is and what it means. what the difference is between all those clauses, so all the small print. That's our job, to make that as good, to work with the author as much as possible. And then outside of that is author care, which is actually the thing that takes up the biggest amount of my time. And that could be all sorts of things. That could be admin around invoicing, so that, you know, authors aren't worrying about that. That could be discussions about covers, making sure that the author is happy with it, talking about publicity and marketing. You know, when things are good, I probably am less needed on that author care. It's lovely. It's just it's celebrating time. But I think publishing is always a bit of a roller coaster, and, you know, there are always big or small hurdles along the way, and that's when it's great to have an agent support you. And author care could even be just, you know, we are the people behind the curtain, if you like, and we're the person that see things before you present them to a publisher. And, you know, so actually sometimes it should be really, it's quite a personal relationship. So if one of my authors couldn't deliver for something that was, you know, a personal reason at home, I would be the person that they would tell, and it would be up to me to convey that to the publisher, renegotiate their delivery and things like that. So the author care element is probably, and, you know, I would include in that bouncing around ideas, talking about, you know, this, I would prioritize this idea over that one because I think this is the way the market is turning, and all of that. So I think it is a wide job, but ultimately, if you just describe it in a sentence, we should be your champion and guide.
Yeah. And I think as well, maybe just to clarify for people, you don't pay an agent to read your work?
No, never. If someone's asking you that, they're nefarious. Don't do it. No, absolutely not. We get paid when authors get paid. So we have a commission. We take a commission. It's usually 15%. This is very broad, but this is usually the same across all of us. It's 15% usually for the home market, and then it might be 20% if it's US or translation. But we don't take that money until we receive your first payment. So equally, agents are, if you like, working on a risk or working on a gamble also until that work is sold. So if we spend a year editorially working on a book and it doesn't place, we haven't made any money out of that. So, you know, so there's a big element of risk. I know it's a big punt for authors, but it's also a big risk for agents when we take people on as well.
So it is a red flag if an agent that you submit to asks to be paid before they read your work.
Yeah, absolutely. Nobody should be asking for any money from you. That's just not how it works at all. There should be no fee for reading and no fee for representation.
Yeah. And the whole process starts with submission. So whether that's when you submit to an agent, well, let's go down that road first, because it's pretty much the same as submitting to a publisher. So there's a couple of things. Usually you go to the agent's website and you'll find what it is they want you to do, and you're advised to follow that advice fairly carefully. So usually it's a query letter, a synopsis. If we're talking middleweight, it's a query letter, a synopsis, and then maybe the first 3 chapters. Now, I know people who did not sleep the night trying to write a query letter. So I'm going to come back to you, Shane, on this, the dreaded query letter, because no point talking to Clare, because she wouldn't understand that. She thinks it's a really straightforward thing.
I don't.
And send a synopsis, while we are sweating at home thinking, A, I don't know how to write a synopsis, and B, I have no idea what to put in that query letter. So Shane, give us a few tips on the letter.
Well, again, I suppose I was quite lucky in that I wrote to Marianne, and I remember, I think my sense of it in Clare would have much more insight into this. You don't want to put your life story into a query letter. I think it can be short, to the point, warm. It has to be warm. Sometimes I get it. Sometimes you hear people say that there might be a sense of, this is the greatest thing you're ever going to read. Kind of, there has to be an element, and certainly. I think you have to have your bit of confidence about sending it in the first place. I think the important thing is when you're sending some work, I think you have to feel that it's worth sending in the first place. That is important.
And Shane, isn't it important as well to wait a bit? I always think
Absolutely.
in the beginning I sent things in too soon.
Yeah.
Even if you think it's ready, it probably isn't.
Most common mistake, I would say.
I would think so too.
Yeah, no, that seems to be, and I think that's an issue in terms of writing in general. Sometimes we can feel so keen to get something out there, or something can feel like the greatest idea in the world. And the great thing, so again, to echo what Claire was saying, like, as an agent, Marianne is phenomenal. She's the most important sort of relationship I have within writing. Your editor is extremely important, and maybe we'll be talking about that at some stage. Your editor is very important to the book, to how the book ends up on the shelf, but your agent is so much else and everything else. And I have a meeting tomorrow organised by Marianne. She makes connections for me. Sometimes things work out, sometimes they don't work out. But if I ever have a question, I know I can go to her. And she's also the person now that I can say, I have an idea and I'll say it. And I'll know pretty quickly from her whether it's a good idea or not a good idea. And you can, in a way, that's where you can waste your sort of, you can have a go at something and it doesn't necessarily always work out. But an agent will help you with that. But I think in terms of submitting to an agent in the first place, definitely you want to have something that you feel is strong. And it's okay to walk away from something for a while and give it that bit of breathing time, or find somebody else who will have a look at it and read it. And it's okay as well that if one agent doesn't quite like, or not even that they don't like it, but just there is that awful phrase, and I've heard it in my career as well in various ways, it's not quite right for us. Which is the sort of let them down gently line. But I've actually learned over time that often it actually genuinely isn't quite right for the person you sent it to. They might really like your writing. And I've had this experience where people have really liked things that I've done, but for one reason or another, it doesn't quite work for them, or maybe the agent feels that they won't be able to represent it as well as they like. So
maybe as well a bit of research, Shane, into what that agent does and what kind of books they like and what kind of people they represent. Would you agree, Claire?
Oh, definitely, 100%. I mean, it's everyone says this all the time, but this business is incredibly subjective. I turn things down that then I see selling, and often I think this will sell, but I'm not the right person for it. Equally, I've taken things on that no other agent offered for, and it's then gone on to sell. On the query letter, I can do some quick nuts and bolts if you like, if it's useful, just as a quick rundown. And they're all a bit different. Nothing's a deal breaker, I would say, as well. So if these things come in a different order, it's not going to be a flat no. But I would say start with the work. Start with what exactly it is. Is it a middle grade book? What's the word count? Is it the first in a series? Is it a standalone? Then if you can, think of a really great one-line pitch. That's so helpful to us. It really shows us where it might fit in the market. And it also shows us that you've really thought about that as well, that you've thought about what your story, where's the point of intrigue, where's the hook, what's different about your book. Then after that one-line pitch, it's great to have a blurb, just like you get on the back of a book, just as if you were browsing in a shop. That's super, super useful for us. And what you're doing is giving us the hint of a great reading experience, exactly as a browsing buyer would want in a bookshop. And that's all we want the covering letter to do, is to get us really excited about what we're about to read. And then after that, we definitely want some information about the author, but exactly as Shane said, just not too much. Just keep that to quite a concise paragraph if you can, and include, of course, any relevant information, anything that makes what you've written really authentic, or anything that you've done, like attending events like this.
Like what Rob was saying about having another life in philosophy, that's relevant.
100%, absolutely. Again, though, if you don't have prizes, or we don't see what's not there either, so it's also fine just to say I live in such and such with my goldfish and my mum. That's also fine. And then it's also quite useful to just say why the agent and why the agency. And in some ways, that's just a nice bit of flattery. It's nice to be singled out. But in other ways, it also shows us that you've really done your research, and that you've looked at, if it was me, you've looked at who I represent, and you've taken a guess that my taste might align with your work.
You could also play the Irish card, and say, I'm Irish and I know you represent Dave Rudden. And
definitely do that. And our agencies, we've always had a wonderful group of Irish writers. Very proud of that. So, but I think they're the sort of main things. And I'd say,
and about how long, Claire, is a
page. And again, it sounds silly, but short paragraphs, it's just, overwhelming chunks of text. It is all just about getting us excited about the book and giving it as a bit of a sense of who you are. And as Shane was saying, I'd say one of the don'ts is to say, I will make you millions. These are the movie stars I want to star in my adaptation.
The neighbour's child thought it was better than Harry Potter. I'm just saying.
Exactly. exactly.
They read hope.
Yeah, and actually, and following on from what Shane said again, the confidence thing is really important, because while you can't over-egg it and say, I am the next bestseller, I am the next J.K. Rowling, which we've heard, a lot. Equally, we have people saying things like, well, you probably won't like this, or this probably isn't good enough, but I've sent it anyway. And if you don't believe in your work, how can we have the confidence to believe in it as well?
I suppose as well, Claire, you're dealing with the professional, so you should also present yourself in a professional way. Make sure there are no typos, no wrong spellings. I always used to think agents get so many submissions, they're looking for an excuse to say not that one. And an excuse is maybe spelling your name wrongly. Or
things like getting my name wrong and things, that, because it obviously shows a bit of a lack of care, or that's how that comes across. So certainly that, and it's not a job interview, but it's a bit like that. You're approaching someone saying, would you like to work with me, essentially. So definitely be professional, and maybe not too over familiar in things. Sometimes people have talked about my children's names and things because they've seen, they've followed me on
that reminds me of something
social.
We were asked, I think, at another session. Is it okay to say Dear Claire?
Of course.
I don't need to say Dear Miss Wallace.
No, of course not. Of course, and we should get along, and we should be able to just to have exactly as Shane was saying, you should be able to pick up the phone to your agent and ask them a question. So it shouldn't be too scary and removed. That's fine. I think as well, things like the odd spelling mistake and things. Obviously, you want people to do checks and all of that, but I know how much people worry about query letters, but they aren't. I would never not look at the work on the basis of, something spelt wrong or something that wasn't there in the query letter. The only way you would do yourself a disservice with it really is just not making not really thinking about the best way to present your book. That is all it's there for.
Yeah. And Rob, I hope this isn't an unfair question, but when it comes to a synopsis, like you said, you were used to academic writing, doing a synopsis of a fiction book for children, how hard did you find that? Was that very difficult? Or a pitch, Well, when people say, what are you going to put on the back of the book? Was that difficult for you?
It was kind of difficult, I suppose. And for me, I was kind of doing a pitch within a pitch. So I already had established the relationship with Little Island, luckily enough. And we already were both kind of agreed that there was something to this idea of finding an interesting and fun way to introduce philosophy to younger people. But I had to try and convince them that the narrative approach was worthwhile and it was possible. So, while I already had that relationship with Little Island, I had to kind of try and convince them that this was a good idea and worthwhile to kind of pursue. So part of that was writing a synopsis of this story. And again, this is my first one, so I'm not sure exactly what the kind of standards and criteria are for writing a synopsis in general. But for me, it was trying to give a sense generally of what the kind of plot structure of the story was. What are the key points of action? How does the story have some forward motion? What is the kind of starting point, the setting, and what's at stake? Why would someone care about what happens next?
I think that's a great tip. That's a great tip for a synopsis. Why would anyone care?
Yeah, and because I guess my situation was kind of unique in the sense that I had an agenda, which I know can kind of potentially corrupt the storytelling process in a way, and I was very aware of that from the start. My motivation was, how can we find a way to make philosophy fun and exciting for young people? And I wanted to do that through a story, but I was aware of the fact that could become preachy or condescending, or you could be trying to ham-fistedly force philosophical ideas into a narrative, and it becomes transparent that that's what you're trying to do. So I really did try to, and I worked with Little Island a lot to do this, but to try and make it kind of seamless and to really authentically mean that the characters had these issues that they were facing. And it was funny, once I started writing it, the emphasis on the story and the characters and what motivated them and their relationships became much more interesting and took up a lot more of my time and energy than the actual philosophy aspect of it. But in terms of the synopsis, just to return to that, it was given an overall sense of what that story looks like. What are the key points of action? What is that forward motion that will carry someone to keep turning the page and care about what happens to these characters?
And again, I suppose they don't want more than a couple of pages.
Yeah, it was about 2 pages, I think.
2 pages, yeah. Because I think after that people get tired. They don't want to read any more than that. And they have a lot of stuff to read as it is. So we're doing well now. We have the query letter, put to bed, that's easy. do that. And we've done the synopsis, which is also, well, a synopsis is a synopsis. It's not a pitch. So I've always been told, I don't know if everybody agrees with this, you do tell everything. You don't say, and then something surprising happens and leave them hoping. They're not the reader. They are the professionals. They want to know what actually happens.
But some agents differ. Sorry.
Yes,
Some of us, so definitely just check the website, because some of us say no spoilers. Some of us say include spoilers. I love a spoiler. I want it all in. But the other thing about just really quickly on synopses, I love talking about them because I know people really struggle and hate writing them. And we're really aware it takes all the joy out of the lovely, brilliant fiction that you've written. I would say you definitely need one, but it's the last thing most of us read. And it's just a sense check. And some agents don't read them because they want the reading experience of the reader first. And what they might do is then go back and check it later if they've requested the full, or just look at it very quickly to check that it's going to stay, that the story is going to stay like within the genre, that it's not going to, for example, it was a middle grade book that was supposed to be a sort of cozy middle grade book. It's not going to turn into a story about something much darker, or, in the second half. It's just checking. So I think synopses are things that really, really worry people when they're querying. And I'd say out of the three things that go in that initial query, it's probably the one that is the least, in some ways, it's the least likely to disrupt your chances, if that makes sense.
I think that will reassure a lot of people, Claire. So I would imagine that the most important thing probably is when you get those three chapters, we're talking middle grade, you get the first three chapters of the book into your hand and you're reading the story. So that is really maybe as writers where we should put most of our energy, ignore everything else, worry about that, get those three chapters really polished, really shiny. And like we said earlier, don't submit it too soon, do yourself a favor and hang on to it a bit. Make sure it's as good as it can be. And I totally agree with Claire from things that people send me. People sometimes are just too quick to submit stuff that isn't really ready. Also, I think most agents need you to have finished the book. Claire, would you agree with that? You
Yes.
don't send three chapters and say, no, I'll write the rest when they buy it. So you do
Yes.
need to have it written.
Yeah, there's a good reason for that. And it is because if we're really excited and we say can we read on, you want to build on that excitement with us and give it and be able to have it ready to go. And also if it's not finished, we don't know that you then will finish it. And so we can't really wait. And also the market may have, things might have moved on, or so yeah, absolutely have it finished.
Okay, so I'm going to move on a little bit. And how many agents at a time should I query? Do the writers want to jump in there, or can I query 20 agents at the same time?
If you like, of course, it's totally up to you. I would say come up with a group of maybe 5 or 6 of your top choices to start with on your first round. It may be that, so if it all goes well, you've got then hopefully more than one offer of representation from your top choice of agent. If someone's really liked it and they give you a bit of feedback, that might be really, really useful, especially if more than one person does give you some personal feedback and it's similar, that then you can go and revise it, and you may be able to resubmit to those initial 6, but you can also then send to 6 more. There are a lot of us. I think if it's especially the first time you're sort of tentative about it, I would do your research, find your top 5 or 6 and start there. I would say, actually, if you hear that you should only go to one person, don't. It does take us a long time to read. It can be 12 weeks. We know it's not really fair to have to wait that long to get a response and then do a second agent. So I think it's fine to do a few at once.
Should you say in the letter, sorry, Claire, should you say I'm submitting to more than one agent this time, or I'm submitting to you and 5 others?
You don't have to tell us how many at all. I think I would always assume that it had gone out to other agents, but if you say it, that's fine to say it's on a wide submission, or I've sent to several agents, but we wouldn't ask you who that is. And the other thing is, if somebody does request it and ask to see more, definitely tell all the other agents that are considering that you've had that, because they will absolutely move it straight to the top of their reading and they'll prioritize it. So definitely, if you do have a quick bit of interest, keep that momentum going and definitely tell other agents that you've got it.
Yeah, I think as well. Sorry, Shane, go ahead.
No, sorry, it was just in my own experience. I actually, I'd sent that sort of 5,000 words originally to a reader for an agent. So agents often have a reader who might be, especially if they're London-based, they might have somebody in Ireland who reads on their behalf and filters some kind of stuff out for them first. And I would have sent it to a reader for an agent a London-based agent, and actually she didn't get around to really reading it. She was quite distracted by something else, and actually had managed to kind of help facilitate another deal around that time. And sort of as that went on, and it was quite a long time waiting, that's when I would have then got in contact with Marianne Gunn O'Connor. And, so I think, as Claire was saying, sometimes things can take a lot of time. And if you're sitting there waiting, the last thing you want to do is start saying, have you read it? Have you read it? Have you read it? I sent you this, because that's not going to, that people are busy. So I think again, it was enough time that I realized I can't just sit here waiting forever. So I made that kind of next step. And that next step turned out to be, for me, the one that was probably the best email I would say I've ever sent in my own career, because it kind of changed everything after that. So, and I think there's an element of timing. I think there's an element of timing and luck that's involved in everything that you do as a writer, whether it's finding the right agent, finding the right editor, finding the right champion. As Rob was saying, somebody like Grania, who's fantastic. And you find, when you have somebody like that who sees what you can do, and that they're brilliant at their job, as Grania is, and, sometimes that doesn't happen immediately. It can take a little bit of time, or finding the right editor even. And I've had changes of editor. That's why an agent can be very important as well, because I've had different editors, between, people go on maternity leave. In one case, somebody else left. I had an editor in the US who left 3 months after we arranged the deal, and suddenly I don't have an editor over there. So there's all sorts of things can happen, but the agent will be that kind of core, that sort of constant all the way through. So as I said, a little bit of patience can be needed to just find your right moment and your right time. And I think an agent will often know that when they're submitting a book. That, it seems to me, part of the strength of a good agent is knowing who to send something to, when to send it to them, when it's right, when it's not quite right. So when you do get to that agent stage, and sorry, we might be skipping ahead slightly, but there is that understanding you have to have as a writer, that the agent then will know a lot more than you do and knows a lot more people than you do. And that's where the trust comes in, and understanding that you mightn't be ready. The book mightn't be ready, and you have to have that patience and understanding. Because an agent can also be, I think, a very good editor to an extent.
Yeah, thanks, Shane. And I think, the next thing that will happen when you send out your 3 chapters is, if an agent likes that, they'll ask for the complete manuscript. And I think a lot of people starting out don't realize that is kind of the holy grail. Not everybody gets asked. Very few people get asked, I would imagine, for the full manuscript. So that's a cause for great celebration if somebody wants to read the full manuscript. And then you send your full manuscript and you wait to hear. Now, the trouble is, I suppose, I'm different from Rob and Shane. I queried lots of agents, got loads of rejection letters. At one stage, I was thinking of wallpapering the downstairs bathroom with them, because they were just piling up. And somebody asked there in the chat box, I hope, Paul, I've got your question right. At what point do you give up on that particular story? I wonder. You sent it out to all those agents and they've all said no for whatever reason, or they said nothing at all. You haven't got much feedback. There may be a point where you have to say to yourself, maybe this isn't the right story, and maybe I should try something else. But when is that point? It's very hard to know, isn't it? Or do you at that point say, well, I'm going to forget about agents and I'm going to go directly to the publisher, like Rob did, and like I did with Little Island, with my first book. Again, I went to a talk and I heard Elena, who's now CBI's woman. Elena was talking, and she said, if you have a story, send it in to us. And I took her at her word, and I did. But I went directly to a publisher, and then I got an agent later. So that is also possible. And like I said, with Irish publishers, the O'Brien Press, Little Island, Gill, Mercier, have I forgotten anybody? I think all of them will read your work without an agent. And even some of the publishers in the UK will. How do you find out all this? You find it out really in the Writers and Artists Yearbook. That is the one thing you have to get. There's a special children's edition now that you can get, and it'll tell you everything. What the agent's looking for, what the publisher is looking for, who will read unsolicited stuff, who won't. So I would definitely say go get that. So let's say that we do get a good response and from an agent, and the agent offers representation, or maybe more than one agent offers representation. Now what do you do? Claire, if more than one person offers, in happy days, if more than one person offers to represent you, what do you do?
Definitely, if you can't meet in person with them, which obviously is difficult at the moment, then you definitely want to have a good meeting over Zoom or a good phone call. And it's absolutely a two-way thing. You don't have to say yes to the first person that offers. You know, Shane's talked about trust, which is the foundation of the relationship. You have to like each other. You have to feel comfortable. You have to feel like you've got a shared vision for the work. There's a lot of things to weigh up, and some of that's just instinct. It's sort of, you know, a personal thing. And some of it's, I mean, it's fine to have questions. I would expect, if I'd offered representation, someone was having a phone call with them, I would expect them to potentially have a list of questions for me. And it's absolutely fine to have them written down in front of you to work through them, because there's lots of things you'd want to think about, you know, whether it was how big someone's list was, whether they work for a big or a small agency, and the differences with that, and what that might mean for you, what their editorial thoughts might be, whether they were happy for you to explore other areas of your writing that you might want, you know, perhaps you want to write picture books as well as middle grade, and you've got a non-fiction idea, and it would be good to gauge the agent's reaction to all of those things. So it's absolutely a sort of a two-way interview, if you like, that initial conversation.
You don't have to be afraid of asking questions. You can ask. And I can say to you, well, I'm also talking to 3 other agents.
Yeah.
But I'll let you know as quickly as I can.
Yeah, and actually often with that, it's a couple of, I think probably the max, probably because we're all desperate and we're waiting, it's good if you can make a decision within 2 weeks, but I think most of us are happy to wait that long. It is a big decision. It's also fine to want to talk to your friends and family about it, and to weigh up all your options. So actually, I don't think an agent should pressure you into saying yes, or say, well, I've made you this offer and I want you to decide by tomorrow, because you want the relationship to be a long-term one that's going to last for years. And so I think it's really important that you feel that you've made the right choice. It's not going to work for anyone if you haven't. And
maybe you could contact a writer who is represented by that agent. I've had that happen to me. People have sent me a note saying, what's your agent like? Because I've been offered something. So I don't think writers mind that at all. I think they're very happy to share on those things.
Definitely.
So Rob, when you were going through the publication process and you didn't have an agent, at what point or in what bits of the process did you think, I'd love to have somebody, a professional person in my corner? What were the hard parts?
Definitely the whole contract negotiations, or not even that there was many negotiations. Like, I kind of just, you know, I trusted Little Island, and that was fine. Luckily, I kind of knew some people who were involved in publishing and being agents in other organizations. So I was able to go and have some conversations with people to talk through the contract, and just to get a sense, like, I mean, I wasn't particularly suspicious, or I didn't have any major issues, and I was so excited to be in the situation and to have the opportunity. I was happy to go for it, but you know, you don't want to kind of sign anything or make those decisions without getting some sort of outside advice or some support from someone who knows what's going on. So I definitely felt a little bit exposed in that situation, and I realized that's really a great situation to have an agent, to be able to bounce that off and to be able to get that kind of insider expert advice about what you should do and what you shouldn't do.
It's a legal document at the end.
Absolutely.
Of the day. You know, you buy your house without talking to a solicitor, you know, you do need somebody to look at it for you. And I totally agree with you. I was the same with Little Island. I totally trusted them. I knew they weren't going to try and pull the wool over my eyes. But it's not often about money. It's about the detail, about rights and all
that. That's it. And there's more detail than you think. Well, there was more detail than I thought. You know, as you said, about rights and you know, even like thinking about film and TV things, not necessarily that's going to happen, but just knowing that you're setting yourself up to be kind of fair to yourself in the long run. And so that was one instance where I really would have appreciated to have advice.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's definitely where I would think as well. You would feel very exposed without an agent. We didn't talk about submitting picture books specifically. Now, our favorite question on WonderFest: should I get my cousin to do the illustrations, to put in with the text there now? Because he's really good at the old drawing. And I do know that you have to send the illustrations. Shane, take us through it.
Well, it's interesting. And I want to give a shout out. I mean, CBI and WonderFest, you know, there are so many really good events and kind of like this. Children's Books Ireland do coffee mornings, and WonderFest do these great these great chats. And the reason I'm saying it is, and it's not been officially announced yet, so I can't go into too much detail, but I actually sat in the midst of lockdown, sat in on a picture book one, which was fascinating, and you were there, I think, Trish, and it was absolutely amazing. And I then got a query a little while afterwards about, did I have any interest in writing picture books? And that, so I totally recommend that people, the more of these kind of things that you do, the more you learn, the more you talk to the writers, the more you get a sense of what's needed. I'd no idea of the structure of picture books. I'd no idea of the process of picture books. So for those who don't know my writing, I write chapter books in middle grade. And in the case of something like Boot, which that's the third book there, Ben Mantle is the illustrator. You know, it's very much, as with picture books, it's word first, and then the illustrations afterwards, certainly in my current experience. But as I'm kind of learning picture books, the illustrations are primary, you know, it's so important. So, you know, the amount of work and the effort and the illustration that needs to go into that is huge. And largely the idea is the older the reader gets, the less that is a factor. And when I was writing Dartmouth, you know, there are a lot of illustrations, but there are different types of illustrations. They're not, you know, not as plentiful. You will have quite large sections of the book which are effectively just, you know, words. But I would say my experience of it, and again, you know, my understanding is generally you write the story if you're the writer. If you're a writer illustrator, it might be a different proposition, because obviously you're coming as a package, but that's a double skill, writing and illustrating. And often the truth is that you'll find that sometimes people are stronger at one than the other. And but if you do have that skill, you do have that story, then yes, as far as I know, you can bring those things with you. But certainly if you're a writer, I am awful at drawing, and I do that when I talk to kids. I will often show them how bad I am at drawing. But what happens is you write the story, and then the publisher, you know, if the deal is agreed, they will match the illustrator. You will have a say in that. They might show you a couple of different illustrators and say, what do you think? And I would have, in the case of Ben, I would have seen a couple of different illustrations from different illustrators, and Ben's just were absolutely knockout and straight away characters. But certainly, I think if you're writing, and even if you're writing picture books, write the story, but also, as I've learned, and I learned from that CB, I think, write a lot of stories. So don't send a single story. A single story will not, you know, I think for that age, it's different if you're writing middle grade. It's different if you're writing YA, when you'll have one story. It might be 15, 20, 60,000 words long. But if you're writing picture book stories, it might be 600, 500, 600 words long. So when I was asked to submit some picture book ideas, I would have sat down and I would have sent maybe 12, 13 different picture book ideas, and they would be a range of different ideas and different styles. And they were all kind of stories, little stories that I was interested in, but different types, different approaches. And one comes out of it as being the one that's getting turned into a book. So that's, I mean, you've been through this more than I, you know, you've been through this as well. You know, it's a very different world, isn't it? Picture book.
Absolutely. And I mean, rule number one is do not send illustrations unless you are a professional illustrator. Forget that. People go and pay people to do illustrations so they can send it in. The publisher doesn't want it. The publisher wants your story, and they will match you with an illustrator, like Shane said. So I think what freaks people out is, you know, because often it's like 500 words, they think that's it, that's what I'm sending in. You know, 3 A4 pages with a couple of lines, you know, and that is what you're sending in. You just need to believe in that. I, like myself, there are usually 12 double page spreads. So when I'm writing the text on regular A4 page, but I might say 1 of 12. So the first spread, this is what happens. Or this is the actual narrative. And 212 right to the end, so that the agent or the publisher can see where I see the story, where the page turns are. In picture books, page turns are everything. They're like the ad break in a TV program. What's going to keep us going and keep us turning the pages? So you're thinking about things like that. But that's all it is. just write the text. Sounds so easy, doesn't it? But with a picture book, you know, when people say, how long does it take you to write a book? A picture book could take you a day to write, but it might take me 2 years to think of the idea. So you need that really good idea, that thing that stands on its own and can be told quickly and visually. You know, you have to ask yourself, on every spread, what are we looking at? If the whole story happens in somebody's bedroom, then that's 12 pictures of somebody's bedroom, and that's not going to swim. So I would definitely think about that. But forget the illustration problem. You don't need to worry about that. And I totally agree with what Shane said. Write loads. Because if you think rejection is bad in middle grade and higher, it is nothing to what you can burn up in picture books. Because, you know, not that many of them, I suppose, get published in the end. So, you know, you have to come up with a really good idea. And it has to work as a picture book.
I think
I rant about picture books.
No, it's all right. And maybe, sorry, and I don't want to, I'll let everybody else in now, but I think the trick for me, because I can't illustrate, I have no, as I was saying, I can't draw at all, but I do think quite visually. And I often think of it in those, as you were saying, think of the action, and it might be whatever way you want to think of it. You might think of it in strict picture book terms, or it might be in filmic terms, you know, in terms of what's happening next, what's happening and the background and all that. And just that you're giving them something that when they read it, they go, yes, this can be illustrated and this is the variety in it. And also, I think just the final point is, when you're working, when you send that in and when you do get that opportunity, you'll be very proud of your work and your writing, but be open to what an illustrator then brings to your writing on top of that. And you will often find that if you get a great illustrator, as I've been very lucky to have, when I see Ben's work, it adds to my work. It changes sometimes how I view characters, and then I use that as a jumping off point when I'm writing in future. So it can be a wonderfully collaborative process, but you have to accept that it will go through the editor, through the publisher, that they have to have control over it. Otherwise, it's chaos.
People are surprised that often you would never speak to your illustrator directly, you know, maybe until the book is published.
I've never met James Delarue, who did these illustrations. He lives in Guernsey.
That's no excuse, Jane.
And that's about as far away as
you go.
Right now, that's about as far away as anybody's going to get. But so I've actually everything was done online. Everything.
There was a question there earlier, sorry guys, now, but I'm sorry to the person who asked it because I can't remember your name, but I did see the question, and it was to Claire. And Claire, if a publisher is interested in my book before I submit to you, should I say that in the letter?
Yes, definitely. Absolutely. That's 100%.
Or what happens if you submit directly to a publisher and they offer you a contract? Now, can I submit to you now, and will I put in the subject line, I have an offer? Because how will you know with everything else that's coming through the door?
Yeah, I would probably flag that in the subject line. And you absolutely can. You can absolutely find an agent with an offer on the table and then ask that agent to step in and do that negotiation bit on your behalf.
And somebody in the chat box there was saying there's the Society of, it's one I'm not aware of.
Society of Authors.
Who will also help you out if you don't get an agent and there's a contract going on. They will give you legal advice.
Yeah, they will. They'll review it for you and flag the bits they think you should push back on.
Yeah. So that's all good. I'm feeling happier now. We've sent in the thing and we got the answer saying yes, and we're doing the contract and we're with the publisher. And now we move on to working with an editor. And just before we leave the picture books, I think to remember, you write the picture book, if you're just the writer, you write it as a solo agent. But once it goes to the publisher, it's now a team effort. It's you and the illustrator, 50-50. Their input is every bit as valuable as yours. And I think you have to be open to that and be flexible and know that it's not finished just because you've done the text. You know, it's going to move. I found with all my picture books, things had to move a bit to accommodate the illustrator. I'll just say this really quickly. One of my funniest things with an illustrator was when it was an Irish language book called Mishuggah and Dragoon, and the illustrator was the wonderful Steve Simpson that a lot of us would know here in Ireland, fantastic illustrator. But one day he sent me a note saying, Trish, there's a monster that was nameless, a monster in the book. He said, could it be a robot with flowers growing on his head? And I said, why? And he said, because I'm really good at drawing them. And we did. We put it in. the robot with flowers coming in. Anyway, you have to get on well with your illustrator, whom you will never meet, but you have to do it through your editor. But let's say now we've got the contract, happy days, we've had the champagne, and now you start working with the editor. And again, say with a middle grade novel, like Rob did or like Shane did, you know, it's finished, you've done it. You've done maybe 5 drafts before you sent it to the editor. And then there was the 6 drafts you did with the agent, if you have one. So now I'm giving it to the editor. Really, I'm looking forward to the cover. And that rarely happens. So, Rob, will you talk us through what it was like being edited, having somebody working with you on the text?
Yeah, so like the Little Island themselves did kind of one major edit on an original kind of first draft that I had, which included all sorts of otherworldly elements and dimensions and universes that they said. Like I was excited about it, and the broad structure of the story was still the same, and they were like, maybe just keep it to the real world. There was too much in it, maybe, you know. So that was fine. It was a little bit difficult to kind of accept because I had kind of grown, you know, somewhat close to those characters and ideas. But after that, I worked with an editor called Sheena Quinn, and she was brilliant. She was really excellent. So we had a meeting, and we sat down and we just had a conversation, just kind of a getting to know you conversation. And I guess she was trying to kind of figure out where I was coming from with the story and with the book and what I wanted to do with it. And I'm not sure how many drafts we went through. Maybe there was like 3 kind of edits that Sheena did with me. But it wasn't until the last one where I really went like, the impact that her edit had on the story was monumental. It like cut all the fat away from it. It was like if it was really loose laces that were pulled tight, is the way I imagine it. And suddenly the pacing and everything just came to life. I guess what Sheena did for me was, my text it had all the elements, it had all the characters, it had all the kind of the structure and the plot, but it was too clunky. It was fat, and it was full of kind of, it wasn't succinct, it wasn't to the point, it wasn't fast paced, and Sheena's edit just really kind of tidied it up and tightened it up. And it was like when I read it, it suddenly became a children's book. Whereas before that, it was just in my head, it was just me in this kind of world trying to describe what was happening.
Yeah. And
I was able to then, when I read her draft that she gave back to me, able to take a step away from it and see it as, I could imagine it being on a shelf somewhere. I could imagine someone else reading it. I could imagine it not just as what I was trying to create, but as an object almost separate from myself, which is a really interesting experience, but it was really exciting as well at the same time. So I had a great experience with the editor, and I really learned a lot myself, again, because this was all new to me, about what it takes to write for children in that way.
I think they're absolute geniuses. I mean, they, you know, I learned from them that they're so good at what they do. And I suppose it is important to be open to that. Shane, did you enjoy the experience of having your books edited or getting notes?
Yeah, I think it helped that I was an editor in the Irish Times for a long time, so I understood where they were coming from, which is they're trying to make it better. And maybe I was a little, you know, I was, you know, I had been edited for a long time, and I was an editor, and I suppose I maybe my skin was relatively thick. There was a good line my Dartmouth editor would have said to me, Nick said to me, early on, when so you get the book back the first time, and you might have quite a few pages of notes, and it might feel like your book is the worst book that's ever been written. Everybody's made a terrible mistake. This is all, oh my God, let's call the whole thing off. I'm going to give you back the money that you've paid me to do this. I'm so sorry. But look, that's part of the process. And he said, now you can go away and cry in a corner for 15 minutes and then you can get at it. And you're allowed feel a little bruised sometimes because you've spent a lot of time on it, but then somebody else is going to see that clearly and that'll remove. And the other thing is that I learned very early on, an editor, all the things you think you've got away with and covered up in terms of the weaknesses in your plot and characters and everything, they'll spot it. And that's what you want. And ultimately, an editor is there as the first person among a team of people who are trying to put the best book that they can on the shelf. And if you take it from that point of view, I have to say, I've been lucky actually, because even though I've had different editors for different reasons, maybe it's me, I've just realized, what have I done to everybody? But actually, I've had wonderful experiences with them. And in fact, I've worked with one editor who had moved. So I'm with Hachette for Boot, and I was with HarperCollins for Dartmouth. And there was an editor there who moved over to Hachette, who I'd worked with in HarperCollins. And because we had such a good relationship, and because I think I think sometimes you find those moments, you say, was I easy to edit in a sense? Was I good to work with? Was it okay? That's when you find out, when they sort of move over somewhere else and then can decide whether you're going there or not. And I think it's important to be open to it and to accept that your book isn't perfect. And when it's on the shelf, it won't be perfect. And bits of it will eat away at you every time you see it, or pages that you open up, or parts of the thing, I should have done that.
Or Shane, do you ever read out a piece to the children and then change it as you're reading it because you wanted it the other way?
Yeah, well, I've certainly edited.
I've actually done this, yeah.
Or take out a word. They'll never notice.
Which, Rob, what have you sort of, is it a big part of it? Is it a small?
No, it'll just be the language. I'll be just reading something that's like, oh, I really don't like how that sounds, and I'll just say something different for the sake of this. And I was like, so I
leave out an
that
adjective or something,
Yeah.
There was no need for that first day ever.
Did you ever, Rob, disagree on anything that you were? Were there any arguments, or maybe not even arguments, but points where you said, no, I'm not. I really want that. I want to keep that.
Yeah, there was definitely a couple of little things like that I pushed back on. I can't quite remember exactly what they were now, but for the most part, I was open and trusting on it. But like you said, Shane, it's literally impossible for you to create a piece of work and see it the way someone else sees it. So you're just not going to be able to see everything in it, no matter how much time you give it, or how much distance, or how closely you read it. It's your relationship with it is always going to be different. And so allowing someone else to come in and see it through different eyes is just absolutely essential. But no, for the most part, I was pretty open and trusting in terms of making those changes.
And yeah. I just remembered literally the most recent editorial notes I've got. So you will get a lot of notes, and even in a picture book, it's amazing how many notes you get. Yeah. You kind of think, well, it might only be a couple of things, but there's something for sort of every 4 lines. But the most recent one was, this is an interesting one about when you're writing from Ireland, often for an English market. Sometimes you have to think about the language you're using, and what might work here doesn't necessarily work elsewhere. I'd use the word yoke, as in a yoke, like a thing.
Yeah.
And my editor thought it was a typo, because this was a completely unknown use of the yoke word in England, and that's been the most. And I was like, no, it's a word. Ask it. I wanted to pull people. We were actually having coffee. I wanted to grab people as they're walking by and go, you know what a yoke is? Of course I know what a yoke is. It's a yoke. But I'm afraid yoke has had to go. So it's funny, the things that come up that you just don't see or think about.
And I suppose the other thing at the moment, particularly with picture books, is, we're inclined to write a lot of the time about what we remember about our own childhood, about our families, and stories based on that. But I suppose we have to now as well remember that every family isn't like our family. We have lots of different kinds of families, and to write outside your own space sometimes, maybe, that everything needs to be represented. Not in every story, obviously, but, that to be aware that you're writing for more than one kind of a society. And I think that's important at the moment. I'm just looking here, there's a question here for Clare about the query letter. And I think we alluded to this earlier. Should I mention in the query that a publishing house is interested in my picture book series? I've had one-to-one Zooms and emails, an edit of the manuscript, but not an official offer as of yet. Now this, I think, Clare, is becoming more and more common, isn't it? Where before a publishing house buy a picture book particularly, you do have to do a bit of work in faith beforehand. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's true. Actually, all publishers vary from house to house, but some publishers won't take a picture book text through acquisitions unless they've also paired with an illustrator, and they take them both through together as one package. And sometimes, so they've already signed up in theory to the text, and then it might take 3 months to find an illustrator that the author then approves, and then you won't get your official offer, if you like, until that's until those things have gone through together. Some editors will work on a text before they officially offer for it. That's really normal. Agented or unagented, that's completely normal.
Yeah.
Several rounds sometimes. Things often develop quite, I actually had a picture book, a fiction picture book that I sent out that's now become a narrative non-fiction picture book through that process, because it's just kind of naturally evolved with the editor that wants to work on it. And definitely mention it in your covering letter, definitely, if you've got that interest.
And that brings me to another favorite topic. Having done all of that with a publishing house, it may still be a no at the end of that.
Yeah, and that's hard.
Yeah, it is very hard. And I was going to ask particularly the two writers about dealing with rejection. Because if this business is about anything, it's about rejection. For all the ideas you come up with, not all of them will become a book. And it is very difficult. And especially when you're starting out. And one of the questions there about saying, at what point do I give up? And I don't know what Rob and Shane would think. My own philosophy about it is, we love writing, write more stories, write something else. I think it's a real mistake to get hung up on one text that isn't selling, and that blocks you totally. So Shane and Rob, jump in wherever you like there. But how do you deal with rejection?
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't have a huge amount of experience because this is my first novel, my first book. I can speak about at least the original idea I had that I mentioned earlier that was quite different from what the book turned into. And that was a form of rejection, I suppose, from the publishers who said, look, this is not going to work in this way. There's too many elements to it. And I suppose, in a sense, they were saying, like, to be able to manage all these different elements, like a different kind of dimension, a different universe, the school itself, the philosophy elements, would take a lot of experience and skill as a writer to be able to do. And, they were very kind of honest about it and open, and they were supportive of the idea, but they just wanted it scaled back. And that was kind of difficult to hear because I was really excited about it, but I trusted them. And I think what you mentioned, Trish, I'm actually a musician as well, and so I've been doing that for years, and I have more experience with rejection in that world. And I think what can carry you through those moments is just reminding yourself about your relationship to the music or the work or the book or writing or literature in general. And reminding yourself that you got into this game because you love that. You love to read and you love to write. And success is a bonus, and getting published is a bonus, and that's wonderful. But I always like to imagine myself, even if I was unemployed and doing nothing else, I'd still read lots, I'd still write, and I'd still play music, just because those are the things that I like to spend my time on. That's how I like to spend my days, So reminding yourself of that kind of relationship can carry you through those times of rejection, I think.
Yeah, and even if that book doesn't get published at this time, you might go on to write a far better book, and then your back catalogue will be published as well. So, it's never, I think they're never gone. They just go in the recycling bin, they'll come out again as something else. Shane, how do you deal, have you had to deal much with rejection, or how do you deal with it?
I think I've probably been lucky enough in terms of publishing, in that the stories, and again, I think it's where a good, when you talk to your agent, often they will know as well whether this is the right thing at the right moment and whether it'll be interesting, or if you have a relationship with an editor already, or you're working with an editor, you can have that conversation with them. Say, look, I'm thinking about doing something on this. What do you think? And that can often help. So it's important sometimes to have those conversations, see what it is. Does this sound right? Does this sound like something that might interest you? I think when you're starting out, the truth is it's difficult. And rejection then, and I think the other thing you have to remember is even when you're a writer, a professional writer, and sometimes we feel like you've climbed the mountain, and I would definitely have felt that the first time round. And I'm lucky enough to have 7 children's books since, with more on the way. You still have those difficult moments along the way, and one of the best pieces of advice I got was actually after I got the initial contract for Dartmouth, where somebody who is steeped in the books world in Ireland, in the business, said, enjoy this moment because a lot of things can go wrong. Your editor might leave, and that actually happened with the US editor, as I mentioned earlier. Your books mightn't sell.
Yeah.
you know, it might, you know, things mightn't quite work out as you imagine them to be. And I think I've probably hardened up to that over the years, because a lot of what he said was right. And I've seen, and I've been lucky enough to do some kind of movie, TV type of stuff as well, out of the books and outside of the books. And that is a really harsh environment where things are incredibly exciting and happening, and this is going to be huge, and then boom, nothing. And actually, I think if there was anything from those kind of general rejections, is I think if you can learn as you go along, learn both to to kind of say, well, what is it I can do? Just in terms of your writing, maybe there's some element of your writing that you can improve on. Maybe you're chasing something. Sometimes we chase a trend, and I think that's something which is a lot of maybe when starting out, and actually even when you're in the middle of it, you can find yourself going, well, those books sell at the moment. I could write one of those, but is that the reason you're writing that story or writing that book? So there's all those different things that you can kind of just try and learn and ask yourself, and do talk to people as much as you can as you go along as to maybe why it hasn't quite been picked up.
Yeah, absolutely. There's another good question there. I've been introduced to children's therapeutic stories since becoming a foster parent. Is this something any of the panelists are familiar with? Is there potential for more children's books to be written in this genre? I think she means would we like to see foster children and their parents represented in books more than they are at the moment? So Claire, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I'd like to see all shapes of families in books. Actually, it's one of the things that editors are specifically asking me about on picture book teams at the moment, is to have a much more diverse representation of the different families that we have. I think one of the difficulties of doing that really, really well is that you still need a story there that's a really good story, that rather than it being about the different shape of families itself. And I think that's what editors are feeding back to us that they would absolutely love to find. But absolutely. And I think there's a big drive in publishing at the moment to actually move away from everything being about traditional family makeups, because that's not the reality.
Yeah, and it also touches on what Rob was saying about the philosophy, about having it, first of all, to be a story for children and adventure and exciting, and then the philosophy. And I guess with things like families, it's not always about that, but they feature as normal life, which of course it is normal life. So we should see it as normal life. Somebody else asking there, for a chapter book for a 7 to 9-year-old, what would the approximate word count be?
I'd say about 20,000, roughly.
What's boot, Shane? Is that? Yeah,
that's about 17 to 18,000. So it's actually, there was quite a difference between Dartmouth, which they were all 65 to 70,000 words, and Boot is about 17, 18,000. And my next book, which is a chapter book, I would have filed the first draft on Friday, and I think that came in at about 16,000. But there's a little bit of, I know there's a bit more work to be done on it. First drafts are not perfect, and that's something else I've learned. They don't have to be perfect. But so that would be about right. And also short, I mean, I don't know, again, Claire, in your experience, whether, you got to think about the chapter lengths. And the great thing about writing for children is you can vary it. You can have fun with the chapter lengths. The next book I have out, I think the first chapter is about 800 to 1,000 words long, and the next chapter is 5 words long, and then you can and it sort of screeches to a halt halfway through. So there's lots of ways you can think about how the book is going to flow. They're very different. The great thing about writing for children is you can do so much. You can have so much fun, not just with the story, but how it's presented, how it's broken up. I have a chapter in the first Dartmouth, which is 8 words long. And that was the editor's idea, just to really emphasize this literally explosive moment in the middle of it. So, and I think that's part of the fun of writing for children.
I think too, in general terms, when you're writing for children, particularly children of the 7 to 9 who are kind of just reading independently, avoiding maybe big blocks of text. I would say have a lot of paragraphs, keep it shorter, because kids are put off. I used to teach kids how to read when I was a teacher, and they are totally put off by big blocks of text. It looks frightening. And also, if there isn't much dialogue, that age group, 7 to 9, get very worried very quickly. So I don't know, Claire, if that's what you find, but I think that's...
No, I'd agree. And I think it's a really great general tip to just kind of always think of your reader. It's just to always have your reader in mind and the reading experience of that reader. So, short chapters are great for to keep kids page turning. And also, it's just those small rewards for kids as well. I remember the joy of finishing a book myself and thinking, I've read 70 pages. And it wouldn't matter if there was 3 words on one of those pages. It's a huge achievement. So I think just generally thinking about the reading experience and what will be the most exciting, best engaging, moving reading experience for your reader is good. Just general advice for whatever age range and genre you're writing in.
I was doing a workshop recently with adults, and somebody said, I don't have children of my own, and I don't work with children, so I feel maybe I shouldn't put myself forward. And all that occurred to me was anything I've ever written, I wrote for the child that I was. I never wrote for my own children. I never wrote for children that I taught. I wrote for the child that I used to be, that was constantly reading. Because I know her. I don't think you'll ever know another child as well as you know that child. And then people say, but I wouldn't know the way they talk nowadays. And there is a bit of that. We don't know how they talk. But and they have phones and things. But they're not the really important things in the story. Look at Shane with the robot, and it doesn't matter. It's about emotions. We all have the same emotions, and children have the same emotions today that we did when we were growing up. So I wouldn't worry about that for anybody who is concerned about that.
No, we want books to make us feel, whether that's laughing or being, we want that emotive engagement. But kind of adding on to that as well, the other great bit of advice, just read it. It doesn't matter if you've got children or not. Read in the area in which you want to write. Read some more. But that's probably the best first bit of advice I could give anybody. Yeah. Read as much as you can within the area and look at what you like and what you don't like and interrogate that. Why did that work and why did that not?
You read as a child. I mean, you need to read what's coming out now.
Yes, absolutely. Contemporary things that are in the shops on the shelves now. Yeah, new publications.
One thing that used to always bother me was when they talked about voice. When you get a lot of back saying, we don't quite like the voice or the voice. Will we do a bit of rapid fire? What is voice? What do they mean by voice? Shane,
I was literally about to say the one thing actually Marianne said to me after the book was bought, First Darkness was bought, they said they're buying your voice. Yeah. Which again was a lovely bit of advice, because I realized at the time that there's a lot of work. That was her way of saying there's a lot of work to be done on the book. Don't be afraid of that, but they like the voice, the heart of it. And I think, as Claire was saying, you need to read. But at the same time, I think the thing, and it's not easy, but the thing is to then, what is it that you bring to a story? What is it that I think that's what voice is. It's how you tell that story. The characters you create and how you take it from here and put it on the page. And I think that goes back to what I was saying earlier about not always chasing something that because that's what you're seeing on the bookshelf. So reading hugely important, and at the same time then, and I would have spent my life doing that, and in terms of journalism as well, especially. Reading a lot of the likes of Clive James and Anthony Lane and these critics who were, really important to me. But yet, the under it, you're saying, well, you can mimic, or you can take the best elements and just try and. How do you then kind of it goes in here, and then when it comes out again, in your own writing, how is it that you've done it? How is it you've done it that you've added something to it and brought your own thing? And it might be your life experience. It might be how you talk. It might be how you write, the rhythms of your writing. It might be the character that's in there, but that's for me. It's a slightly loose. I've realized these even as I'm talking about it, because I haven't probably articulated it enough to myself, or even, and I'm not articulating it particularly well. But I would certainly say, what is it you bring to a story? Maybe is the best way to put it.
Yes. Just like when you listen to the radio and you hear a voice and you immediately think, I know who that is. I know that artist. It's not dissimilar. It's when you pick up a Shane book or a Rob book and you know that author's voice. It's exactly that. What's uniquely you that you bring to this? What's your writing sound, if you like? It's exactly the same.
And I suppose the positive out of that is everybody sees the world differently, and nobody has ever seen the world the way you do. So we are all able to bring a unique story,
And that's why, sorry.
Yes, sir.
I was just going to say that's why it might take a while that we talk about finding your voice a lot when we're doing like writing workshops and things, and it's fine if that takes a while, because that's exactly when you get to the point where you're not imitating anymore, and you're not taking from here and taking from there. It suddenly clicks that this is you and what you're doing, and you're the person to tell this story, and it has to be you that tells it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes, no, that's absolutely excellent. That's what I would think too. I'm very aware that the clock is ticking down. Yeah, we're nearly out of time. I hope we haven't forgotten anything. I'm a bit worried about those chat boxes. I hope I'm seeing everything. So if any of the team are seeing anything that I'm not and they want to give me a nudge, do. But in the meantime, I think we can kind of recap and say, remember the big things. I would say join Children's Books Ireland, keep an eye out for all those events. You need to find your tribe. You need to have the support of other people who are doing what you're trying to do. You love writing, that's the most important thing. Keep writing. Don't worry about rejection. If one story keeps coming back, write more stories. And eventually you'll write one that everybody will love. I think get hold of the Children's and Artists Yearbook. Follow what they say. Don't rule yourself out by going to the wrong agent or the wrong publisher. And other than that, all you can say really is enjoy it. So I'm just going to give another scan to this box in case I have anything. People are saying they're really enjoying it and very interesting. And why wouldn't we? We've had a brilliant panel here who are so generous and so honest about their experiences. So a huge thank you to Clare, to Shane, and to Rob. And thank you to WonderFest for having everybody. And a reminder, I have to look at my notes now, a reminder that we have loads of things on still for the weekend. Oliver Jeffers is coming up. Great things. And this is what you want to hear. You want to hear people and hear their stories. Go to our website, www.wonderfest.ie. You'll also find all the speakers' books there, which will make great Christmas presents for everybody you know. There's no need not to give them a Rob or a Shane book. That's what they want. And also you'll find, which I love, there's a great gallery there of illustrators who are selling prints and original pieces. So you could look at that. That might be another Christmas present. So until then, I think I've said everything I was supposed to say. Usually when I come off these things, I think, oh yeah, and then they said to say that and I didn't. But tonight I think we're good. Again, huge thank you to everybody and all the team behind the scenes here who've been minding the chat boxes and the questions, and all the people who tuned in tonight. Really hope that your book does get published and that tonight was helpful. So until we meet again, keep reading, keep writing, and enjoy it.